Really useful. That's all I ever wanted to be ever since the moment I was built. To be a really useful locomotive and a great servant to the Northwestern Railway. But no, nobody thought I was capable of doing such a thing. And now, I watch my remains as they rust away underneath the surface of the ocean. What happened was something that I don't want to be forgotten. Something I had to do. This is my story. The year was 1939. World War II had just begun, and in the grips of it was Sodor, and its engines found themselves in a difficult place, as they needed new locomotives to help with the extra troops and freight trains. So, in 1940, they decided to build a locomotive that would be their first engine solely to be built on Sodor. That engine was me. I was built in May of 1940. I am a female engine, and was solely built to be on Sodor. The reason I was built on Sodor. I was the first ever engine to be built on Sodor. I was a class very similar to that of the London, Brighton, South Coast Railway E2 class, though very different. I was longer and had four driving wheels instead of 6, a taller funnel, and I was built to haul passenger, freight, and shunting duties. I was the first engine of my type, and was the only one. I was painted dark blue with black stripes, with NWR on my side tanks, and I was numbered 700. I didn't have a name, so people called me by my number, 700. As soon as I was built, I had one goal: to be one of the most successful engines on Sodor, and to work very hard. Once I was built, I was sent to Victorstown Yard, where I would serve as their primary shunting engine. But that wouldn't last long, as only a month into my career on Sodor, I was again given a new job. I was given the job of shunting many troop and ammunition trains. I was very careful pulling the ammunition trains, as I did know that ammunition can explode. So, I was not allowed to go any faster than 10 miles an hour each trip. Troop trains, I was only allowed to go 15 miles an hour. I didn't care. I just saw this as a useful opportunity to show how useful I was. Indeed I was. I proved to be a valuable workhorse, and was a perfect engine for the railway. However, many of the engines didn't like me. Throughout my life on Sodor, I was bullied by many of the locomotives who didn't think I was a trustworthy engine. There was one engine in particular, Gordon. Gordon never showed any respect to me. He said that I was an engine that was only built to shunt, and even if I tried to retort, he always said the same thing: tender engines don't shunt. There were 3 engines that I liked, and that were the only engines that actually cared about me. Their names were Thomas, Edward, and Henry. Henry was mixed bred, just like me, and we hit it off immediately. Edward was a very kind old engine, and I believed anything he said. Thomas was what I would consider to be my first real friend. Thomas has always been known to be a cheeky engine. Not during World War II, though. He was a very kind engine, and he worked his hardest. Even though he wasn't allowed to pull any trucks. And I remember an incident in 1944 where he nearly crashed. And even an incident in 1943 when he tried to take some coaches, which when Henry was ill. I still remember those days. But, all in all, he cared about me, and was what I consider to be my first real friend. We were very similar, and in fact, I turned out to have a crush on him. But I hid this to myself, of course, and just worked hard to be a really useful engine. There were also other engines that liked me too. Colin, Lily, Adam, Jeffrey, the list goes on. But some engines did not. Gordon and two other locomotives that were bought the same time as me to work on the railway. Their names will be Jack and Boris. Jack was a GWR City Class locomotive, while Boris was a member of the Britannias, one of the most beautiful locomotives built by the LMS. Me, a female engine, saying this, even though I would have preferred a much kinder Britannia than Boris. Those two, along with Gordon, never liked me, and always said I was an improper engine that was from an improper building, and was thought to be sent away. I remember one day Gordon said to me this, "You'll never get to pull passenger trains. You're just a little tank engine." I was bigger than Thomas, and much more stronger, but I didn't say this directly to him, as I thought I would hurt his feelings. After World War II ended, I was sent back to Knapford to become a shunting engine. At this time, we met a new engine. This engine was black and was an engine of the Doncaster and Yorkshire Class 28. As you may know, his name was James. I met him while he passed by me at Wellsworth while I was shunting. He seemed like a very kind engine, and he wanted to be a really, really useful engine. I whistled him a happy toot and wished him the best of luck on his first day. Less than an hour later, I was still shunting at Wellsworth when I heard a frantic, "Help! Help!" There was James rushing down the line. His brake blocks were on fire. Behind him, the troublesome trucks were pushing him down the line. I was shocked. I always knew troublesome trucks were troublesome, but that was the first time I've ever saw an engine actually become a victim of the troublesome trucks. 5 minutes later, I heard a terrible crashing noise. I say about 5 minutes later, Thomas was passing me with the breakdown train. "Has James fallen off?" I asked. "Yes, I'm on his way to help him." He was a very brave tank engine, and I liked Thomas for that. A few hours later, I saw him rescuing James. James was all wrecked, and after that, I always had a negative opinion on James, due to him having wrecked on his first day. But not only that, an engine who was foolish enough to have wooden brake blocks. I never heard of such a thing, and even though I was only 5 years old at the time, I was very, very cross. I kept it to myself, though. However, not everything was bad out of that accident. I soon learned that Thomas had gotten his own branch line, which ran to Farquhar, and he had two coaches, Annie and Clarabelle. I was very happy for my best friend, as he had his own branch line. I asked him, "What do you think?" And he said, "Oh, it's much better than just shunting trucks in the yard." And I agree with him. Very, very well. You see, I always wanted to have my very own branch line, but I never did in my life. Gordon was right. Maybe I wouldn't get to pull passenger trains. I only shunted and pulled troop trains and freight trains, but I never pulled passenger trains. And yet, Gordon Jack and Boris would still tease me. I didn't let this go to my head, and I just did my work. But I didn't let this go to my head, and I proved to be a really useful engine. I remember one day in 1946, where James was sent to pull yet another freight train. I remember making the train for him, and wishing him the best of luck on his train, and hoping he wouldn't cause yet another accident. Still, I always had a negative opinion on him for being such a lousy engine. Luckily, he did his train fine, and I congratulated him. I was never a arrogant engine at best, but I was a bit naive at times. But I was also a kind engine, and Thomas, Edward, and Henry were my friends, and I treated them very warmly. James, let's just say we didn't have a very good relationship. In 1949, we got yet another new engine. He was a special Hunslet shunting engine that was built to shunt the yards at Wellsworth, where I had been currently working. His name was Wilston. Wilston was a, how should I put this, quiet engine, but he didn't shy from a bit of teasing, especially to James, Henry, or Gordon. I would often join him in his teasing, even though I felt like teasing was not my specialty. But I soon got accustomed to it. I didn't see Wilston as much, as he was working, and me was put to the sheds. That's when I wondered, what would happen to me? For a whole week I was in that shed, wondering what would happen. Would I be bring back to service? I've only been serving for about 9 years. I was hoping it wouldn't get scrapped. Thomas would come to visit me at times, and he said that I was still a really useful engine and his best friend. Then, in 1950, I was given a new job in a new place, a place that has never been talked about on Sodor until now. In January 1950 through February, Sodor had built a brand new harbor that ran close to the main line and the Farquhar branch, and he decided to name it after one of us. I, of course, didn't want to be named after anything, as I didn't have a name, only a number, 700. So, Sodor chose James. He named the harbor James's Harbor. James was very proud to be the name of a harbor. I have to admit, though, he got a bit cocky. When James's Harbor was opened, me, Thomas, James, and Jack and Boris were sent to work on the harbor. Thomas would deliver the passenger trains. I would shunt the freight trains, and to sometimes take the goods trains. So James would take the mixed goods, and Boris and Jake would take the trains bound to the main line. I have to admit, James was not very fond of me and Thomas teasing him about being named after a harbor, or him being named in the harbor. He took this with great pride, and due to me and Thomas's teasing, which was kind of unintentional, he wanted to prove himself to be a hard-working engine, and I respected him deeply for this. But still, I had a negative opinion on him. I always thought he would never be kind or cheerful. He was never a cheerful engine to begin with. The only times he was cheerful was because he was boasting about his beautiful red paint. I kept my blue and black paint. Thomas said it was a beautiful paint scheme, and that may make me love him even more. Throughout 1950 and 1951, I would work really hard in James's Harbor, and was one of the best engines in the field. Still, I was a constant victim from the bullying of Jake and Boris. Those two never liked me, and never did. They'd say I was a worthless cause, and still, even though I proved myself to be a really useful engine, they didn't care. All they cared about was themselves. It made me angry. But they even said this: "Would you be one night, I remember them asking me this: 700, if you would be scrapped, what would be the reason? You'd be a really reckless engine, or you having a serious accident that was made you damaged beyond repair? Several nights after that, I suffered terrible nightmares of me carrying a passenger train and crashing. A huge explosion, passengers screaming in pain, bodies, blood. All I knew was that this would never happen, but it did. And it all happened on February 13th, 1952. It was February 12th, 1952, and I was working really hard at James's Harbor, as always. Then Sir Tom Hack came to see me. He said this: 700, we're opening a new passenger service to run on this line. It is called the Sodor Seaside Special. Will you take the first train, which is tomorrow? I was very shocked and surprised. I had never taken a passenger train before, but I didn't know the ropes. Yes, sir. I'll be happy to take the train. I said. Good. You'll be taking it tomorrow from Netford. And he left. That night, me and Thomas had a conversation about my future career. Maybe this will become your own service, said Thomas. I don't know, I replied. You know, I was really excited. I remember that a few days ago, I witnessed Wilston get scrapped. In January, he had failed and was proved to be too costly to repair, so they had him scrapped. It was a day that I never forgot. Wilston will want you to be very proud to have your own train, Thomas said. You sure, Thomas? I replied. Of course. He would love you to have this train. I smiled. Thomas was always kind to me. And as he fell asleep, I looked up at the stars. Please, I said, let my first day on a passenger train be real. The next day I was given a thorough inspection. Thomas witnessed it. Then I was ready to collect the train. As I set off, Thomas said, Goodbye, 700. I'm going to have to shunt in the yard for a little bit. Hope to see you back soon. I know I would see him again soon, as the train was heading straight to James's Harbor. However, it was the last time I spoke to Thomas before it happened. 2 beautiful coaches waited at the station for me, and all were packed with happy passengers on the new service. I coupled up to the train, and soon enough it was time to leave. All the way, 700, my driver said. Of course, driver, I replied. And I puffed away down the line. I was soon puffing down the line at a great pace. The coaches hummed and the signal lights shone green. I was making terrific time, and was a smooth rider. The passengers cheered as I pulled into Wellsworth. There, I saw Gordon. Gordon looked at me and sniffed. Ha, he said. A tank engine carrying a passenger train? How filthy way to travel. You should be still put up in the shunting yards at James's Harbor. You know what you are, 700? You're not even built to carry passenger trains. I mean, us tender engines can do better. After all, you're just a little shunting engine. Don't say that, Gordon. I'm a really useful engine. I snapped back. Gordon only sniffed and puffed away. I was furious. Don't listen to him, my driver said, but I did. As I puffed away for the final time to James's Harbor, something inside me changed. Unbeknownst to my driver, I started to go faster and faster. By the time he realized, he slowed me down a little. But that was only something, as I came up with a plan, a deadly plan. I soon approached James's Harbor. I could see Thomas shunting in the yards, and there, in a shed resting, were Jack and Boris. A new set of plans was taking shape. 700, slow down, we're entering the harbor, my driver said. But instead of slowing, I gave a slight chuckle, and I shot forward. "Oi! 700! What are you doing?" my driver said. I didn't respond. I went faster and faster, entering the harbor. I didn't stop at the station. I had a shot right past it. 700, what are you doing? Thomas asked. I didn't listen to him. I pressed on, faster and faster, down the line. On the quayside, right next to the shed where Jack and Boris were resting, there was a train of oil tankers. I rushed towards them. Jack and Boris and several workmen pleaded me to stop. I still didn't listen. I pressed on. "Please, 700, you'll kill us all!" my driver screamed. It was then that I lost my mind. I gave in to my hatred and utter suffering, and shouted out my last words. "I'm going to kill you all!" Yes, I did the unthinkable. I had killed myself, my crew, the guard, the 31 passengers on board the train, and the 47 other workmen at the harbor, which resulted in a catastrophic explosion that destroyed nearly half the harbor. James and Thomas were able to escape with slight injuries. Boris and Jack were completely destroyed by the fire and smoke, as they were the closest to me when I had struck the train. They recovered the coaches and the bodies, but not me. And still, my body is still there, underneath the ocean. A year later, the service was given yet another trial. This time, it was handled by a 060 tender engine. He was called Nathiathan. Nathiathan was an engine that was sent to work on this railway. He was a very kind engine. However, when he took the train that I had taken on my first day, he was never seen again. What had happened was, I had put him in his place, for no one would take the train that I was supposed to take. James's harbor was closed. It is now just a rusting memory of Sodor's earlier days, and a memorial was placed for me, even though people kept saying that I was a mentally insane engine. And then in 1956, Thomas met another engine called Percy, and those two became best friends. How could he? He promised me that we'd be best friends forever. And what does he do? Just because I'm dead, he takes me out, and he goes out with he has a new best friend. That was then. This is now. For years, Sodor doesn't even remember me. But now, my time has come. I will pay to those engines, just as I did in Nathiathan. He was found wrecked the next day after he disappeared. The coaches destroyed. The people dead. That was all my doing. Thomas, once I get rid of my friends, I'm coming for you. The end of Sodor's nightmares are just beginning. So long for now.